registered for this webinar, and our goal for today is to share what we've been doing, why we've been doing it, and what we've learned to date as we try to live our vision that all people in Maine have access to opportunities and life outcomes that are not determined in any way by race or ethnicity. The general format for our time together is the first half hour will be time for my two colleagues, Lelia and Gloria, to interview each other to give everyone more background on what the Maine Community Foundation has been doing to address racial equity. I'll step back in for the second half hour to facilitate a question and answer session with Lelia and Gloria, and we'll go up to 1 o'clock for as long as there are questions. In terms of logistics, all attendees are muted and videos are turned off. We ask that you use the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We'll be using this versus the chat room to make sure we capture all of the questions. We will also record this session and make it available on our website for others to listen to on their own time. So without further ado, let me introduce to you Gloria Aponte Clark, our Senior Program Officer and currently the person for our racial equity work, and Lelia DeAndrade, Vice President of Community Impact, who initiated our racial equity work. Off to you.
Thank you, Jen. So welcome everybody. And first, I would like to express my gratitude to the Wabanaki people for caring for this land for generations. And I want to remind us that all of us in Maine, that all of this was Wabanaki territory for thousands of years, and that the Wabanaki people are still here and continue to care for this land. We also want to take a moment of silence, a few breaths, for all who have died because of racial inequities. So join me in breathing together. Thank you. Ready, Lelia?
I'm ready. Nice introduction.
Right.
Thank you, Gloria.
So Lelia, let's share. You led the racial equity work when it was just beginning at the Maine Community Foundation. I would love to hear you talk about why and how the Maine Community Foundation began racial equity work.
So I'll give you two answers for that. First, our first foray into looking at racial equity started back in 2007 when we established what is now called the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Fund. It was initially called the People of Color Fund. We got a gift and were challenged to create a grant program that focused on racial equity, and that grant program was specifically for organizations led by and serving people of color, and helping them address racial disparities. Our work on our strategic plan started in 2016, and that work really began with a close look at our mission. We said, okay, our mission is about improving the quality of life for all Maine people. What are the real sticking points in Maine right now that are holding people back? And we had a series of community conversations and around the state and conversations with staff, and identified 5 goal areas. And at that point, racial equity was one. And we had lots of discussion about this because we wanted to make sure that racial equity was a core value in our work and extended through our work. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure it was established as a goal. So we had our eyes on the prize and focused on working with it. And so the first thing I did once we decided that racial equity was going to be a goal area was I did field work. I went through my address book and I found everybody that I had developed relationships with over the course of the previous 8 or 9 years working with the People of Color Fund, and had focus groups and interviews with people, asking them what the big challenges were around racial equity in Maine. And I learned 3 really critical things. One, I already knew, but it was great to hear people confirm this. We have amazing leaders of color in this state who are working super hard. They work in isolation, and every resource they have is dedicated to their organization. They put their organization first, and they needed help just for sustainability. They're high impact people, but they need to have more support. The second thing we learned, again, not a surprise, was that there's a tremendous need for anything that we could do to boost economic opportunities. People are struggling, and there are clear disparities by race in Maine in terms of economic well-being. And so we needed to do something related to that. That was a big sticking point. And then the other big thing that people mentioned is that we really need to build white allies, that work on racial equity cannot be done by BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color on their own. If we could solve the problem on our own, we would have done it a long time ago. We needed to engage white people in this work and really have them help carry this work and promote it. And so the last thing that didn't come out of the interviews, but it was part of the development of this work, is that we decided that we also needed to take a really close look at our own selves. We can't go out there and support other people doing racial equity work if we're not doing our own work around that. And so we decided to really spend some time, or we heard from staff and from others the importance of us spending time really digging in. And before we go any further, I just want to do a little disclaimer, because we learned all these things and we started to develop strategies, but we're funders. We're not program people. We weren't intending to present ourselves, and we still aren't, as experts in racial equity or people who can provide programs. We were really focused on what we could do to support the work that is being done in communities. So Gloria, will you tell us a little bit about what programs developed out of these three key areas of interest?
Yeah, so the learning was that our leaders of color are such a strength and a gift to us all in Maine, right? And that they need more support. When we compare them to white resourced, white leaders, they're less resourced, sort of across the board. And so the program Investing in Leaders of Color was developed, and it is exactly that. It provides support. And what I love the most about it is that it's really customized to each coach and leader. So each leader gets to pick what goals, what goals they're going to work on over the next year. So it's specific to their organization, specific to where they are in that place and time. And then they get to pick a coach. So we have a group of about 25 coaches who know about racial equity, who work in racial equity and have another area of expertise, like fundraising or strategic planning or board development. And so then we work with them to talk about their goals and then help them match with a coach that has that expertise. And the leader drives everything. So they get to pick up to 3 coaches to interview to find the best coach for them, because, you know, it's a very special relationship when you're going to receive coaching. So that's that program. And we have 10 leaders this year, and really excited about those leaders. You talked about our internal equity work, and for me, that is a real baseline to this work. It really frames all we do. And what we're doing is operationalizing racial equity into all facets of the community foundation, donor services, grants, program, et cetera. And, you know, because we are learning, just like everyone else, we are using really wonderful consultants, equity consultants, to help guide the foundation through this process. And we have a group of staff who help guide the equity work that we're doing, that a representative from each of the facets of the foundation. And some of the fun things we've done are have learning sessions for staff, book groups for staff. Board and staff have received several racial equity trainings as well. Then we also have when you talked about developing white allies, a program that you and Steve brought to the foundation a few years ago, which we call Leadership Learning Exchange for Equity. And that program was developed by New Hampshire Listens. And they brought the program here to Maine, and we trained up a few Maine facilitators to help with that program so that we could run it ourselves. And what makes the learning exchange, I think, really unique is that it's based on relational learning. So the leaders look at their minds with humility and curiosity and notice what comes up so that they can move forward to authentic and grounded action, right? So it's really that internal work for all of us in examining race and racism and systemic inequities, which is going to propel us to action. So we're very fortunate. We have wonderful facilitators for that program that help develop that space where these leaders can do this work. So we've run 3 cohorts so far, about 25 leaders each, and it's about 24 hours of conversation over 3 months. And this past cohort was the first time we went virtual, thanks to COVID. And thankfully, because of the excellent facilitators, you know, it went very well. The Leadership Learning Exchange for Equity is supported by donors. And then the economic opportunity grants, as you mentioned, we know the facts are there. Outcome data shows that the systems have created and perpetuated inequities in every one of our big systems, you know, health, legal, education, property ownership. And so we have dedicated grants that work through the BIPOC grant program to address those disparities. You know, one example, you know, is for 4 Directions Development Corporation to help improve lending processes and procedures and technologies. Another really neat one was the Somali Bantu Community Association for a comprehensive soil fertility plan to expand their flint corn enterprise on their farm. So those are just 2 examples, and that work is supported by donors as well. Anything else come up, Lelia?
Yeah, I was thinking 2 things that popped into my head that I thought were, I wanted to emphasize, and I know you won't, and that is that Investing of Leaders of Color program, you developed it into a really high touch program. When we started, there were a number of foundations that were doing programs for leaders of color starting around the same time, and they were using more of a learning community model. And we decided, because we heard loud and clear, please don't make us go to another meeting from the leaders of color, we made it so that they can just work with their coach and not come together. But the big thing is they get paid for their time and working on their professional development. And then when I talked about high touch, I meant the work that you do and meeting with each leader and talking through the different consultants and their expertise and really helping them identify who they want to work with. I think other programs, in the way I might have been inclined to do this in the past, would be to say, okay, here's your consultant that you're working with, rather than really making this into something that's going to work as best as it can for the leaders of color. And then the other thing I was thinking about with the Leadership Learning Exchange, again, the thing that makes it really different for me is that that's invitation only, and you and Steve work really hard at crafting the list of people who are going to be invited and who participate in this. And you really work to make sure that it's people from around the state, from different sectors. And, you know, the way I think about it is they're thinking about their personal lives, their community, their organizations, and working. When you say relational, I think, you know, processing through it with each other and helping kind of think through what this stuff looks like in their lives. So, you know, those are 2 things that I think your unique contribution to those 2 programs are worth mentioning. I knew you wouldn't do that.
Thank you, Lelia. Honestly, the conversations with the leaders, they're so full of joy and promise. I mean, it's the highlight of my day, and yeah, it's really fun.
Remember when COVID was hitting and we were talking about doing another cohort, and I was like, we can't ask people to do this right now. There's focus on professional development. They're out like helping people quarantine and taking people to get shots and tests rather, and they're just flat out. And you wisely went back to some of the leaders to say, like, should we do this? And they were like, now more than ever, we need to do this. That was like when I started to become very jealous of you for running this program.
Yeah, when in doubt, ask the leaders. You know,
Yeah.
they will let us know the best way, for sure. So another question that a lot of people ask is, how are we measuring success? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the key thing for us to emphasize with all of our strategic goal work, but definitely this one especially, is that we're using this field building approach. It's not, our expectation is not that we are going to change the numbers on racial disparity directly through our work. Our focus is building the strengths of organizations and individuals so they can be effective. This goes back to this idea that we're funders. You know, we're not going to increase the average wage of all people of color in Maine. But what we can do is do our best to support the organizations that are doing this work so they can be stronger and more effective. And, you know, in philanthropy, it's really important to recognize that most of our work is not, we can't claim causation. We can't say, we did X and it resulted in Y. And so that idea of measuring quantitatively somehow, some way things are going to change, it doesn't work that way. We contribute to situations, and there are lots and lots of factors that contribute to whether the dial moves on any of these issues. And so when we think about how we know if we're successful, the first thing that we need to do is go to our partners and find out how the work that we're doing, the programs we're offering, and the support we're offering is helping them. Is it contributing? Is it not? What has really been helpful? What else do you need? Where are the gaps? And then the other thing, because we're definitely trying to be a learning organization, is to look at what lessons we're learning as philanthropists and study that and think about how we can improve our programs. And so for me, those are the ways that we measure success. So can you tell us about some of the successes that, I can't say that, successes that you have seen so far, or the things that you see as being most promising?
Yeah, so investing of leaders of color, I mean, we know that the leaders are the promise, right? They know how to do this work. They do it really well. Some of the things that the leaders have identified, you know, for example, we have a brand new organization in Maine that addresses BIPOC, and that leader is choosing to really work on a strategic plan and develop the roots of their organization, even though they've already done like an incredible amount. They want to go back and really formally do some planning. So they have a roadmap. And in that leader's work, they said they want to work stronger, not harder. Isn't that good? And so, you know, I see that coach relationship helping them do that. Because the other thing we've learned is that the leaders often feel alone. And so, you know, they're often in one professional staff, one paid staff position, or even in an organization that has no paid staff. They're all volunteer. So in the planning of their organization, in that organizational development context, they don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of, like so many of us do. And it's really important. So the coach has provided that, which was something like I didn't anticipate at all. And that's something the leaders have said loud and clear. You know, sort of a more practical example is a leader had been working for years with a budget, you know, that she scrappled together, you know, in an Excel spreadsheet. But she really wanted a detailed budget, you know, that went out several years. And it was a skill she didn't quite have. And so she chose a coach that had that skill, who taught her, you know, how she could do it herself. And now she'll be able to do that forever, you know? So that is amazing, I think. Leadership Learning Exchange for Equity, that's the racial equity training for white leaders. I think a lot of the successes is seeing the leaders be vulnerable and open and able to learn, you know, so opening them up to that learning is really great. And we've gotten some really amazing feedback. You know, one participant described their experience in the program as transformational. Another shared that they see the world through a different, clearer lens. Another described their experience as an awakening. And another said, it spoke to my soul. So I think it takes really wonderful facilitators to have a topic like racial equity, which is a topic this culture has had as taboo, and have those sorts of outcomes out of it. So yeah, the facilitators are able to hold that space where this transformational work can take place. And I think even more importantly is that the leaders are moving into action. So some of the action steps we've heard of are a president of an organization forming an Indigenous Peoples Advisory Council, creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer position in an organization, forming steering committees addressing racial equity within their company, discussion groups amongst their staff. You know, a county leader who went through L2E2 is setting up racial equity training for their field countywide. You know, so those are impacts that I'm hopeful that will be really great.
Well, you know, when you think about these individual leaders, you know, you gave two examples of people really looking at the scope of their impact, right? One person who runs this enormous organization, and that was quite a shopping list of all the things that person was implementing. And then somebody else using their position as kind of a platform to engage other people that are their peers to be thinking about this. And that's exactly what we wanted to have happen, is this kind of, you know, you can go out and lecture people about the importance of racial equity, but when somebody you respect or you're close to, or you just put your thinking hat on and say, how do I make this work? That's where we see real change. And I'm glad you gave the concrete examples, because I'm the concrete person. I'm like, yeah, it's great that they learned. I want to know what they've done. And they are out there doing things. We had a question to explain a little bit more about the Leadership Learning Exchange. And I would just say, you know, two facilitators over the course of many hours with homework and journaling, really reflecting on how white privilege shows up in people's lives. And it's not a guilt trip, and it's not heavy duty lecturing. It's really about conversation and working through this. And that's why I think it sticks. You know, you can do a workshop, but you know, when you're just being talked at and you're, you know, you might remember some random bits and pieces of things, but when you're actually asked to, you know, really put what you're learning into action and apply it in your life and then share it vulnerably with somebody in the room with you, that's where you see things move. What else would you say to describe that program?
I would say what you just said reminds me that, you know, this is lifelong learning, right? There is no one training that we can attend to and check the box and say, my racial equity is done.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is impossible. So, you know, I think the beauty of L2E2, you know, we can also do on our own, actually. You know, I mean, we have so many resources out there that people can really relate to and be vulnerable around to do this personal learning. And I learn something literally every day, you know, I'm not kidding. So there are wonderful resources that, you know, you don't have to be part of L2E2 to start engaging in this work. You know, Dr. Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, just literally one of my favorite books. He lays it out there. It's just beautiful. And there are so many good resources, and we have some great resources on our website for people who want to get started. So, Lelia, why do you think this work is important for MaineCF in Maine?
So, you know, when I started doing this work, people kept asking, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And they would say things like, this is my favorite, we're a white state. And I always think it's so funny when people look at me living in Maine and say, we're a white state. Why are we doing this? Or they would say, you know, this is a new issue because it's about immigrants, or this is only an issue in Southern Maine and the cities. And, you know, early on, I started to explain to people, like, actually, you know what? This isn't an all white state. We have more people who identify themselves as other than just white in this state, identify themselves as people of color in some way, more of those people than there are people in Aroostook County. And this whole idea of, you know, the numbers are small, so we shouldn't pay attention to it, it just seems so absurd to me in a rural state, right? Like, we can't use that framework in Maine, because you can't dismiss communities and populations of people because they're small. We would lose our attention to 95% of the state, right? And I always think, like, you know, just do a little flip and say, you know, here's an organization that's almost all men and there are only a few women in it, so sexism probably doesn't really exist. Like, what woman would agree with that statement? Like, there's only a few of us, so there's probably not sexism. And so I think that's the same kind of framework that we can think about in terms of Maine and why it's important, even though there aren't many of us, and there are more than I know, you know, 75 to 85,000, it's still a significant population. It's still really important. People of color live in every county in Maine. We have been here for hundreds of years. Some people, tens of thousands of years. This isn't a new thing. It's not just Portland and Lewiston, it's everywhere. And so in Maine, I think the reason this is important is because we have a small population and we cannot risk having anybody not fully engaged in their communities and their economy. We have to make sure that everybody has access. Even if you don't believe in the moral imperative that this is what's right and good, you need to understand that this is critical for Maine, because this is the way we're going to survive, that we need to make sure that everybody has access. So that's what's important. Now, you know, it's become very trendy. It's really important now for people to pay attention to racial equity. You know, in the last 8 months, it's become a big issue in the public consciousness. But before that, in philanthropy, it's been developing. And we knew that if we were going to honor our mission, that we had to engage with this. It's not improve the quality of life for some people, it's improve the quality of life for all people. Did I miss something?
No, I
think there was something else that I should have said.
You got it. And I love the, when, you know, one of the things I've learned is to notice what frame you're using, right? And so when people say, which I hear all the time, but Maine is such a white state, it's like, what frame is being used there, right? Yeah. It's that white is dominant, white is best, white is majority, major over. And to me, I'm an immigrant to this country. That says to me, I don't count here.
Oh yeah.
I'm not welcome here, you know, and this is my home. So, you know, I really encourage people to look at what frame you're using when you say things.
If I had $1 for every time someone said that to me, and I've gotten to a point now where, you know, I'm a little bit tougher, and I've gotten tougher and not being absolutely outraged and hurt that I've been made completely invisible to my face. I just recognize that this is the kind of narrative that we hold on to here. And as long as we keep telling ourselves this story that Maine is this white state and therefore we don't have to pay attention to racial equity, we're holding ourselves back. I just, it baffles me that people wouldn't think that it's important for everybody to have a shot. And, when I started doing this work, nobody ever said to us about our early childhood group, our early childhood work, like, oh, well, there are only 75,000 kids who are under the age of 5 in Maine. Why would we want to focus on that? We know that these kinds of investments in people are important. And we think it's really important for the nonprofits that we work with to know that this is about them fulfilling their mission as well. And we're going to do as much as we can to help them do that. So how have you seen nonprofits engage in this work? Speaking of nonprofits.
Yeah, so I've been talking to lots of nonprofits since the uprising. People are interested in learning about racial equity and engaging with racial equity. And so I think they are engaging, people who don't see racial equity as their mission. As you said, it may be that you're not fulfilling your mission if you are just serving the white portion of the Maine population. So, in conversations I have, I always discuss that. And people are engaging, industries from beer making to music chambers to social service nonprofits, to for-profits, to school systems. That's been really beautiful to see, honestly, is to see people starting to really grapple with this because it's not easy work. Yeah. Right? This is beautiful and hard and necessary. And so helping people get to that point where they see, yes, this is mission critical. We have no choice. If we are going to move forward as an organization, then we have to do racial equity work.
So we just got a little nudge from Jen that there are lots of questions coming in. So I think we should move on to answer some of the questions, unless you had anything else to add.
No, that sounds good.
Perfect way to end our shtick. So Jen, do you want to share some questions with us?
Yeah, so there were definitely a lot of questions about the L2E2. I think more specifics in terms of what types of people have been involved. Has the training been designed in such a way that it can be taken to frontline workers, such as teachers or, through the state? And then there are a lot of people who are just saying, how can I sign up? So I have other questions too, but I'll start with that.
Gloria, do you want to take that?
So we've built the cohorts largely from recommendations from former participants. As a starting point, we also look to the industries and sectors in the state that are highly influential, big employers, et cetera. And then it is building a puzzle between all those things, right? So, making sure that the whole state is represented in a cohort is really important. There's so much learning that takes place just from people, from Skowhegan to York. So it's a big balance. And so that's how the cohorts have been built to date. And the people who have gone through are, business presidents, state leadership, nonprofit leaders, some philanthropy. We try to get at pretty much every sector. We've focused a lot on education. We've had a bunch of superintendents go through. And as to whether the model could be built out, that's very an interesting question. I know that, we brought the model from New Hampshire Listens, and then our amazing facilitators, we tweaked it to and built onto it to really focus more on action. And I think the cohort model could definitely work for sector, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Did they answer that?
Yeah. And my fantasy, again, we're not program people, so it's not in our plan to offer this to continue offering this to more and more people within an organization. We're hoping that the leaders will be so invested in this work that they will bring variations of this kind of work to their organization. The good thing, following the examples that Gloria mentioned, is that people clearly know that this is not, they come out of this program and they don't think like, I just have to have a training for my staff and we're good. Like, they really recognize how complicated it is. And I'll just give a shout out to Gloria and Steve about how they work forming the cohort. It is like a well-crafted dinner party. Somebody from finance in Washington County realizes that they don't really have the capacity to make that time commitment now. So how do we but we have a finance person down here in Oxford County. So how do we adjust this so that we have people from across sectors in every county and balanced gender groups? So it's very, very well crafted. What do we say for people who want to know how to participate? The one thing I will say is that our plan right now is to probably have another 2 cohorts, maybe 3 cohorts. So, but, wouldn't it be fabulous if there was a fund and an organization that could continue this work?
Yeah. And again, this is donor funded. And again, this work, it takes a very skilled facilitator to run. It has to be very, very grounded. And so, I just think that's something to be really mindful of.
And I apologize, I left off a portion of one of the attendees' questions that was really, trying to understand, invitation-only programs can perpetuate unbalanced structures of power and connection. So it was really trying to understand why we took the approach with the White Leader Equity Program is not open as opposed to the different approach that we took with the Investing Leaders of Color program. So I think you maybe answered a few points, but if you have any specific response to that.
Jen, you're a little muffled again. So why is it invitation only? Is that the question?
I apologize. Why is it invitation only? And does that perpetuate systems of power?
Well, this is focused on people with power. It's like that's where we're going with it. And yes, it does perpetuate systems of power, but what we want to do is engage people who have power in being allies on this work. There are programs for people who are not in high-ranking, powerful positions to learn about racial equity and participate. That's just not what this one was designed to do. And that, I think, really was driven by how critical it was for us to get movement on this issue. We didn't talk about it, but at the same time, we've done all sorts of grassroots work around racial equity. We had this enormous program where we brought in sociologists to talk about white privilege, where we had 630 people participating in it. We've offered trainings, ongoing trainings for 130 of our community advisors. I have done so many programs and workshops in the state to help people think about and talk about at the community level what racial equity means. And so, the L2E2 program, we're flagging that as a special program, but at the same time, there's all this other grassroots work that we're constantly doing. We're trying to get people and all that apply to all of our grant programs and all of our nonprofit partners to understand that racial equity is critical and help them figure out ways of engaging with this work. I don't know, what else would you add to that, Gloria?
I would add that racial equity and inequities, it's all about power. Right?
Yeah.
All about power and the non-sharing of power and those systems. So this gets at the root of the big S system and the big P power. So that hurts to hear, but these are the people that can start the changes within their systems.
And they're doing it.
And they're doing it.
What else, Jen?
I have several questions, and I think I'm just going to share a number of them. Okay. And I can, if I don't hear an answer to one of them, I'll ask it again, but just so you have a sense of the questions.
I'm going to take notes.
So we've had one person ask about any strategies and methods to organize white allies. Are there any best practices in terms of creating effective solidarity or organizing of white people? There's also been some requests for any good ideas we have around diversifying boards. And the third one is more about any learnings from any of the equity audits that we might have done.
Ooh. Can I take on the diversifying boards thing first, Gloria?
Okay.
This is my issue. People ask us about this all the time. And I will say, before you think about recruiting people of color to your boards or BIPOC people, you need to clean house a little bit. You want to make sure that your board is a place where there is going to be equity, that people of BIPOC people can come to the table as board members and participate equitably. It's not just about getting different colors around the table. It's about making sure that people have voice. And you know, I have been recruited for boards where I will say, so what made you decide to invite me? And they come back and say, well, we're interested in diversity. And I say, well, you know, there's more to me than my brownness and my brown experience, although it's very important to me, but I also have these other skills. And if you just want me to be there as the voice of brown people, that's not my role. And so I would recommend that you don't recruit people for the sake of diversity, but you work on building relationships with BIPOC people and understanding that there are BIPOC people who have all sorts of different skills, the same skills that your white board members have, that they can bring that to the table. So you need to be thinking and stretching beyond your comfort zone and your regular areas of interaction with people. And then you also need to have some strategies for how you're going to deal with awkward situations, so that BIPOC people, if they're at the table as members of your board, it's not up to them to take on a situation when somebody makes a racist slip, because we all make racist slips. So that's what I would say about diversifying boards. And then I'll just say, in terms of best practices, the one thing we keep hearing about that we know, and every qualified high quality consultant in the state will tell you the same thing, it's not just a workshop. Don't call them for a workshop. Don't call them for a day-long training. Don't even call them for a weekend board retreat. Like, that's not how these changes are made. You can do that stuff and it won't hurt, but it's not gonna, you need to do more to get yourself moving. And Gloria's suggestion of reading How to Be an Anti-Racist is one really easy, perfect first step. It's a very quick read. And then I always say, if you don't wanna read something, Google Robin DeAngelo and watch any and every one of her videos. And that is a really good place to get started on this work. So Gloria, strategies for organizing white allies was one question, best practices.
Yeah, so we have to be careful around the word ally. So remember, a white person can't call themselves an ally. So, you know, it's been coming up a lot in recent conversations. So it's up to a Black and brown person to call a white person an ally, right? Yeah. Again, the frame. So I think just organizing white people who care is super important. And I think, you know, part of the thing I think that this foundation did back in 2016 and even 2007 with the BIPOC grant program is starting to bring race into the conversation, right? So starting to just talk to your friends, to your colleagues, have open, honest conversations, just start reading some books and listening to podcasts. There's so much information out there. And I think, you know, you'll do it naturally with your friends and relations, right? And that's where you will have the most influence.
And things develop organically. I'll just give a shout out. You know, there's a senior college class in Brunswick that started looking at white privilege. That spun off a whole bunch of classes after that. And then there are a couple of people who were in one of those classes who belonged to the UU Church in Brunswick. And at one point they had like 200 people come together just to talk about racial equity. It was just like an open conversation. So, you know, some good effort, be modest and accept the fact that you're going to mess up at some point, and then look for what grabs your interest, because there has never been a time when you could access more information about racial equity. And it doesn't have to be all gloom and doom. It can be interesting and inspiring and motivating.
Yeah, and a note, I spoke to an organization this week who they're so invested in wanting to start, but are afraid. Yeah. You know, afraid of messing up. And I said, it's a really important message to learn how to authentically say you're sorry.
Yeah.
Right. And then not try to explain away why you said what you just said. Say,
Such good advice.
Sorry, you know, and I'm so sorry that hurt you. And that I'm trying to do better.
Period.
Yeah.
It's because, no. I think we covered most of that, Jen. What, is there anything?
Oh, the equity audit. So,
yeah.
Yeah, so we learned a lot. And we are a white system philanthropy. And so, of course, we have systems and processes that need to be changed and addressed and looked at. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And it's a ride. We're starting and we're doing the work, and we'll be doing the work for some time. And thankfully, this foundation is committed and putting that commitment into action.
And I can't speak more highly of having an external body come in and look at your stuff. You know, I've been working on racial equity stuff for decades. And I thought that we were really on top of thinking about how racial equity works in our grant making. And it was fabulous and humbling to get other perspectives to say, well, what about this? And I'm not sure about that. And so you have to kind of brace yourself for a good learning experience. But boy, it's great to have somebody else. It's like going to good therapy, right? It's great to have an objective party kind of hear what you're doing and say, this is what it looks like from outside. And we have quite a shopping list of things that we could and should take on as part of our assessment. But the one thing that we have learned, and our consultants keep reminding us, is that this is not about just employing tactics. It's about really digging in and rooting this in your organization in a way so that it's just not a checklist of, you know, I ironed the curtains and now I can move on.
Yep. We're in this for a long time. There's a lot of learning.
What else have you got for us, Jen?
Oh.
You're muted. Oh, here we go.
I know. I think that I have one question that's really back to the racial equity training, just some of the people who have been doing it. Is there a little more about the trickle down effect? I think you shared, you know, a few success stories, but having been in the first program myself, I'm certainly aware of some leaders who have faced challenges because the first program happened before George Floyd's murder, and it really helped them be prepared in their own home institutions on how to address racial equity. Are there any other stories that you'd like to share in this moment?
It's a little tricky to share too much just because we're protecting people's identities. It's not like it's super, you know, top secret, but we want to be respectful of people's privacy. So Gloria, can you think of a story you could tell about an impact without revealing who?
Well, I think something interesting was, you know, after the uprisings this spring, the leaders of the cohorts who had gone through were reaching out to us and saying, oh my gosh, you know, what do I do? Like, help me, provide a little more help here if you can. And so, because they were already starting to be awakened. And so it was hitting them harder, and they knew they needed to act, but they needed a little more support. So we quickly put together another 3 sessions in June, July, and August for the leaders. And I think, you know, it's hard to say specific things without saying exactly who they are. But things are getting addressed, I think, in a way that that perhaps might not have beforehand.
And, you know, we've had Steve, the CEO, and 3 of the senior management team participate in the program. And I can say that it's changed the way I see us interacting in the organization. I mean, Jen has brought up things that she sees through a racial lens now that, you know, 5 years ago, we would never have had that kind of conversation at the Community Foundation. And it's stuff that I haven't paid attention to and stuff that I have. And the fact that it's a team of us kind of exploring these ideas and sharing, like, wait a minute, this has a tinge, or we should, maybe we should team up on addressing this. You know, we can talk about it the way we see it within our own organization. And so an example is Jen leads a team of people who do our philanthropic services, our work with donors, and I do our programmatic work with grant making. And we're switching off and facilitating conversations with our teams to talk about, I'll be talking to the philanthropic services team about adding a racial equity lens to their work and what would that mean. And Jen will be doing it with the program people, the scholarship and grant making people, just because we know that there's a different dynamic in the power structure, and we want to make sure that we have really critical conversations. We would never have had a conversation about how does race show up in the way that we interact with nonprofits or donors. Like, that in and of itself is mind-blowing.
I'm restarting my video because I think I can. I'm having
Yay!
some technical issues. So I want to make sure I got all the questions and answers. I haven't seen any more recently, so we have about 5 more minutes. I know that there are a few parting ideas in terms of, you know, is there any, you know, big idea in terms of what we do have some donors on the call, what you might recommend to them or to nonprofits, and then I'll just do a final wrap up.
Gloria, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. I think really the thought that this is a lifelong journey, that we're all learning. We have hundreds of years to unlearn and to relearn to build a more just and equitable society. And what's really cool about Maine, because of our scale, is like we can really do it here.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that is really exciting. Because of our scale, we have an amazing impact and possibility. So I would say, you know, to anyone on the call, really just start digging in to your own learning. There's so many wonderful resources, so many authors and brilliant people bringing things to light, that just keep searching until someone speaks to you. You know, and you can look on our website for some resources to get you started, and then just start looking, devote some time and energy to learning and relearning.
And then I would say, you know, first steps, easy steps. Look to, if you're really interested in supporting racial equity in Maine, look to supporting the people who are out there doing the work. There are lots of organizations that are led by and serving people of color. They're the Wabanaki Nations. There's so many organizations that you could give to directly. You could, of course, support our Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Fund, but it's so easy to find organizations to support. And we certainly would give people guidance if they had questions about whether this was a solid organization or not, or if it's doing the work that they want to support. But there's a lot out there that you can do. So there's easy learning. And then I would just remind people to be gentle to themselves. Like, this system of racial disparities is centuries old, and it's deeply rooted, and it's like being a fish swimming in water and being expected to see the water. Like, it's hard to do it. And so be gentle on yourself and know that it's going to take a little bit of time and practice. But again, with the thing about Maine, it's like, it is so easy to connect with people and find people who are on this journey, and little things go a long way.
So I would just like to thank you all for joining us today as we learn and grow on racial equity, as well as webinar format. So feedback is appreciated for those of you who may have donor advised funds here at the Maine Community Foundation. As Lelia noted, we're really looking to see how you can be partners with us in this learning and in directing resources to both organizations led by people of color and others working to advance racial equity. So thank you all for being with us today, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
team.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.